into this mix.
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. And today, I really got to talk to you about something really, really important. This has been on my mind for several months, and I have been posting about it on social media. I've written an article here and there touching on the topics, but never addressing it specifically. And I haven't done a video yet, so I figured it's time now for me to chime in and share my thoughts and opinions on why I believe the fighting we're seeing in the streets between AntiFa, between white nationalists and white supremacists, that I believe this apparent division, not only is it a false representation of true American life, but it is also being engineered, it is being promoted and encouraged by forces behind the scenes who directly benefit from dividing the American public in the same ways we've seen divisions taking place in countries around the world. So today, we're going to talk about how the division, the race war, the race divide, all these type of things are engineered, manufactured, and not organic. So this is coming from a two-part article that I just recently released for Activist Post. It's called, the first part's called Warning, the Race War is Being Engineered, and the second one is called Part 2 of the Race War is Being Engineered. And then there's a third article that I wrote before this as well that I'm going to tie in. It's called A Critique of Masked Movements, discussing Antifa and the alt-right and even other groups out there that choose to wear masks on the streets and the possible dangers that come with that strategy. So we'll touch on that last. But first, now if you've paid attention to my work, you know that I am no Donald Trump supporter. I'm also not a Hillary Clinton supporter. Or I'm an anarchist of the market variety, and I don't really jive with these conservative, traditionalist views, but I also don't necessarily have an issue with them. I don't jive with the complete left-wing political correctness, social justice warrior mentality, but I do care about social justice issues, and I do care about compassionately communicating with people. So I have common ground with both these groups and groups within the shades of the political spectrum, and I also have major differences with these groups. So this often puts me at odds with them, especially with this article. I've been getting it from both sides, where people who believe that this, the racists that we're seeing in the country are completely organic, they think that I'm just discounting the fact that racists exist and that there is a legacy of white supremacy, European supremacy to be more accurate, in the United States in the form of European colonization of my ancestors, natives who were here across America, as well as bringing slaves. And yes, there were slaves by other people, and people had, blacks had slaves, and natives took slaves sometimes, some tribes. I'm not going to get into that. What I'm getting into is the fact that the Europeans who came here definitely colonized and left a legacy of destruction and saw themselves as the elitists that would have manifest destiny and carve up this great land to be what they wanted to, with no regard to the people that were here or no regard to the history and the desires of the people that they brought from Africa. So that exists. I'm not discounting that in any way. I'm also not discounting that there aren't racists out there. I have, racists that I have known through family, friends, and relationships of that sort, and people that I've come across in different walks of life that I'm just blown away that they exist. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, and I'm also not saying that Antifa hasn't been violent. And I don't like Nazis, of course. I don't like white supremacists or nationalists, although I think everyone has the freedom to be a nationalist and a supremacist if they want, whether they be native, black, Asian, or European. I just don't think that they should be authoritarian in their desire to celebrate their supposed supremacy of their genetics or wanting a nation. And you have to remember this, that a nation is not always the same thing as a nation state and as a state. A nation, some people identify as like their nationality is their shared ethnicity with their group, or their shared culture, shared values, shared place of birth, things like that. Those can all make up what you identify as a nationality, even though most people think about nationality, we think of like United States. We're thinking in terms of states, but think about a world without states in a more free way. People might still choose to identify as such. Some believe. I don't think those things would become very important over time once we're free from the state and these artificial borders and divisions that have been created over time. There will still be cultural values that are shared and people that tend to come together. There will be others that flock towards diversity and multicultural experiences, but that's going to be up to the individuals involved. So I have issues with Antifa's violence, their preemptive violence. I've written about this in my book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, and an essay called The Authoritarian Right and Left, which you can find on theconsciousresistance.com. And I think that it's a problematic strategy. I also think that what we're really dealing with here, that I didn't touch on these articles, is a historical ideological battle between fascists on one side and national socialists, or just, there's some people on the right wing who are socialists and who are traditionalist nationalists. Look up the Traditionalist Workers' Party. And there are people on the left who, they say they're just out there to fight racists and to fight white supremacists, the people who take up the Antifa banner, who are friends of mine as well. I mean, Scott Crow is a longtime organizer here in Central Texas and around the country, and he's been with Antifa for a long time. He feels very strongly about fighting with these people in the form of violence. But I've spent the last week, in addition to writing my article, I've been digesting everything I could find from the alt-right blogs, including altright.com, the Traditional Workers' Party, Chris Cantwell and others, and It's Going Down, and Crime Think, and some more left-leaning libertarian communist, anarcho-communist blogs and websites, as well as the mainstream opinions and the libertarian opinions and the shades. And I've read hundreds of articles in the last couple weeks about Antifa and the alt-right, and looked at their origins, as well as different opinions on whether or not violence is appropriate and is necessary. And of course you have some of those well-known thought leaders on the left actually criticizing the violence, including Noam Chomsky, who I have my own issues with, and Chris Hedges, who I've interviewed in the past after Chelsea Manning's trial years ago. But both of them put out articles that are very critical of people on the left using violence, and of course denouncing right-wing violence at the same time, but saying like this is not going to be a good strategy, because again, this is a historical battle of Nazism, right-wing fascism, right-wing collectivism, and left-wing collectivism and left-wing authoritarianism in the form of anarcho-communists. There are some Trotskyists on the left wing. There's also, I'm sure, some Stalinists who consider themselves just communists, and socialist workers' parties and democratic socialists, and a lot of people on the left who are feeling emboldened, like they need to do something. And I'm talking about everyday, regular people who never got involved, now feel like they got to stand up and they got to fight this white supremacist scare that's going on. And then the people on the right are responding to that as well. People who aren't associated with the Nazis and aren't associated with the racists are like, whoa, this is crazy. These people are going to take away our free speech. And of course, in front of all this, you've got the media just stoking the flame, just playing this 24/7 since Charlottesville, like the Nazis are literally taking over. Dude, they couldn't even gather 500 people in a park. You know what I mean? And even if they were able to get 500 people, that's 500 people in one single spot. Think about movements that have been much bigger and had very little effect. Like, let's say, the End the Fed rallies, gathering hundreds of people around all the central banks around the country for years in a row, or the March Against Monsantos, or even this recent Women's March, and all these different types of marches and actions, which we can debate whether some of them were organic or not, but they had much bigger attendance than this small little rally here in Charlottesville. Of all the places, they don't even have the power to organize, say, like a national action where all their people come out in cities around the world, around the country. They have to send everybody to one single location, so it appears as if there are a lot of them. But in reality, there's like 5-10 of these people spread throughout different neighborhoods and areas. So they're not even a big threat. I'm not saying they don't exist, of course, but just like we've seen with what other threats do the deadstream media want us to be afraid of in the last year? ISIS, Russia, ISIS, North Korea. Just like these things, they really actually have very little ability to affect the average person, and they aren't going to greatly change the average person's life. What will change the average person's life is the implementation, the complete lockdown of a militarized surveillance state and police state as a result of this fighting in the streets. So again, you have ideologies that are opposing each other. There are definitely fascists, authoritarians, right-wing collectivists on one side that you can follow their line of thinking, the neo-reactionaries. This is just classic right-wing Hegelianism. And then you have, on the left, you've got this mix of communist ideology. So generally, you've got commies versus Nazis. And this has happened before. And these forces have always been there, but they've been the extremes, right? And now you have the media focusing on both Antifa and the alt-right and promoting this idea of civil war. I mean, there's literally been articles from some of the more, left-wing extremists like Slate and Salon commenting and asking, like, is a civil war coming, or saying, like, a civil war is coming and you need to pick a side. Like, that's really crazy. They're promoting and encouraging this type of thinking, and it's very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, and we have to find a way to think about this critically and break through. So, understanding that you have Nazis on one side, you have communists on the other. Generally, of course, not everybody on the right wing, or not everybody who identifies as alt-right is racist or a bigot. Not everybody who supports Donald Trump is a racist or a bigot. Sorry, my friends on the left, I don't buy that. There are former libertarians and anarcho-capitalists for some reason that call themselves alt-right. There's also anti-Semites, there's white supremacists, white nationalists, and others who maybe consider themselves independent that are against political correctness, and so as a reaction, they're sort of working with these people. Super bad strategy. Don't do it. And then the other side, we have this anti-fascist action movement, anti-racist action. These are groups that have been around, strategies that have been around for years. There's not one single centralized group. At least it doesn't appear so. Maybe behind the scenes there might be. But as far as I've known in my organizing, Antifa, Black Bloc, these are strategies that anybody can employ. I know to some of you these are very new ideas and you're only hearing about this in the last couple years, but these are sometimes legitimate tactics to protect your identity, to go out there and to also have a show of force. A black mob of people dressed in all black with masks, it's kind of creepy, right? It freaks people out. Personally, I think that I want to work in the light and I can work directly at people, but they see themselves as bringers of violence and defenders of all that is good. So of course, everybody who has violent means to achieve their goals believes that they are just in doing so. But this tactic has historical roots. It's been around since at least the 1930s, when anti-fascists and anti-racists took to the streets of Europe to fight actual fascists. And now in America 2017, their activities have tended to focus on pro-Donald Trump rallies, freedom of speech rallies, growing American alt-right rallies, and on and on and on. So again, I'm not here to say that racists and white supremacists don't exist and don't pose a danger if given power. And I'm also not here to say that Antifa has not used violence, or that to defend them, defend one side or the other. I'm terrified that these authoritarians from the right wing and the left wing would gain power. Because before I was like, well, we all know what the problem is. It's the state, right? We just identify the state. We focus on building past that. Meanwhile, while we're trying to build the counter economy in the agora, we've got these freaking insane people who I believe are acting out deeper issues. Let me just step out of the more practical talk now for a moment, talking about it on an emotional level. I think what we're seeing is children lashing out in the streets, people who haven't properly integrated whatever sort of pain and hurt that they have in their lives, that they have felt from their upbringing, their environment, or from whatever experiences they had. Because make no mistake, we all have doubts and fears and insecurities that express themselves in different ways. And if we do not work on them, if we don't come to terms with them and integrate those experiences, they will be manipulated, they will be used against us by society at large, by other individuals who see them, for sure by the state, for sure by corporate entities who use advertising and their culture, this false corporate culture, to mold people to being sheep and to mold them to being consumers and those sort of things. So if you don't know how to work on those things, you're going to end up out there being a shopaholic because it feels good, because you're getting a release of a chemical in your brain that tells you, oh, I'm buying something, I'm spending money, that feels good, I'm rewarding myself, instead of looking deeper. Or you're going to use drugs, or you're going to use alcohol, or you're just going to be depressed, or you're going to gamble, or you're going to do something to deal with these feelings that are unprocessed one way or the other. Maybe subconscious, maybe conscious, but you are going to find a way to deal with it, or somebody will find a way to manipulate and use it. So work on those things, because that's what I see in the streets, is children fighting, lashing out at each other, just screaming. I mean, it's the most unproductive thing I've ever seen. So now, do I have any evidence of this being manufactured? Am I just a conspiracy theorist talking about this? Well, you know what? I actually do have some evidence that this has happened in the past, and that we should be intelligent enough to realize that it's still happening. Now, I've talked about how these two groups use masks. And as I said, I wrote a critique of masked movements. My main point is this, is that in the past, police officers have been caught using black bloc and using masks to go undercover and to cause violence. And the right wing has been great about calling this out in the past because they're like, oh, look at the black bloc, those are just undercover cops, even though they're not always undercover cops. Let me just say this real quick, side note. Left-wing friends, not every single protest organized against your causes is done by the Koch brothers. Right-wing friends, not every single protest organized against the things you believe is done by George Soros. Sorry. So these things have been going on for quite some time, and people realize that cops will infiltrate them. Cops will get their guys in there and cause trouble, and they'll be, oh, look, there was violent protesters. We had to use violent tactics. So that's one danger that's posed. And now that the right wing is suiting up and they're wearing masks and shields, and you have people dressed up like it's time for Comic-Con on the street going against each other, and without knowing if the people there are all friends or all part of the same place, it's impossible to know who's a cop and who isn't. And I've talked about this as well in the past. When I was in Standing Rock, I did video shooting where provocateurs were lighting vehicles on fire, and since then we found out that an undercover private intelligence firm known as Tiger Swan was actually doing that, sending their people in there to cause trouble and to light vehicles on fire. So that's why they didn't want me to film them. That's why they surrounded me with all their faces covered, and they all seemed to know each other. They came together, they left together, and for all I know, they were cops, or they were just idiots using a bad strategy and bad tactic. But in 2001 at the G8 summit in Genoa, Italy, there were cops that were exposed as pretending to be black bloc activists, and in the 2007 protests in Quebec, and during the Occupy movement all over the country it was happening. So there is a historical precedent for police using tactics of cover and masks and this sort of thing to infiltrate movements. Now in the second part of my essay on this, I look at Guyana. Now, Guyana is a former colony of the United Kingdom located in South America. It's been reported that U.S. officials feared that Guyana was going to become a Marxist communist nation if it gained independence from the UK, and this worried the UK and the US obviously for their national interest because they were worried about what would happen under the leadership of the Marxist activist Chedi Yagan, or Jagan, I don't know how to pronounce it. A paper written by Robert Anthony Waters Jr. of Southern University at New Orleans and Gordon Oliver Daniels of Mississippi Valley State University called "When You're Handed Money on a Platter, It's Very Hard to Say Where Are You Getting This? The AFL-CIO, the CIA, and British Guyana." So basically what you have here is the UK, their government, working with the CIA and the largest union in the United States, the AFL-CIO, came together to help funnel money into labor movements and worker movements and activists. Now this has been a tactic that's been taking place all over the world. It's sometimes known as color revolutions. The United States and other countries funnel money into places where they have unfriendly rulers, and they want to bend them to their will and get more people in place that are going to be favorable to their causes. But this one specifically mentions that they were using not only labor disputes to cause division between the country, because basically their idea is like, okay, well, this guy's getting too much power. He might end up breaking the country free of our colonial rule. So let's go in there and let's send money into the workers' movements and start attacking him and breaking it up until a counter-revolution is created and we can put our own people in place. And they specifically mentioned using race to do this. So here's just a little bit of the information. The U.S. intervention in British Guyana is one of the least known CIA covert operations. The only mainstream news stories came out in 1967 when Neil Sheehan of the New York Times described the CIA effort to bring down Yagan, as did the Sunday Times of London. At the center of the allegations was the AFL-CIO, which provided British Guyana's union with training and financial aid and had provided secret funding to Guyanese opposition parties. Most of the money for these operations came from the CIA, which finally acknowledged its role in 2005. 50 years later. The New York Times and Sunday Times stories were part of a wave of revelations about CIA funding the arts, religious, and student groups, as well as labor, and were not followed up. They were never followed up. Now, did you hear that? Arts, religious, student groups, and labor. The CIA's got its hands everywhere. So we always have the question, well, all of a sudden some movement is taking place and it's growing rapidly and the media is giving it attention, because we know those on, say, like the Conservative Libertarian Party who or that side of things who tried to support Ron Paul, they didn't like your candidate, so they blackballed him and pushed him out. Those who supported, say, Bernie Sanders or people more rebellious on the left wing who don't toe the party line, they ignore them until they do toe the party line. So if they're focusing on one issue, if they're telling you, be afraid of this, look at this, then I think that is something to be concerned with, especially knowing the CIA's history. The CIA helped fund major strikes and riots that took place all over Guyana in 1962 and 1963. Using the AFL-CIO as cover, the CIA helped create labor tensions, race riots, and other violence that helped unseat this guy in 1964. The leader preferred by the United States, Forbes Burnham, would go on to lead a 20-year dictatorship. Now, Foreign Policy also reported on the CIA's role in an article titled CIA Meddling, Race Riots, and a Phantom Death Squad. They said Washington funded splinter and opposition groups challenging Yeagan, who, as the country's premier in its final colonial years, had developed close ties to Cuba's Fidel Castro. So, according to U.S. State Department archival documents, over $2 million was spent on covert action programs between 1962 and 1968. And Foreign Policy wrote, in the lead up to the poll, the AFL, CIO, and the CIA were on the ground allegedly inciting racially charged strikes and riots. And another historian, Stephen G. Raby, author of U.S. Intervention in British Guyana, A Cold War Story, says the U.S. fostered violence and death in British Guyana. The U.S. money fueled this violence and death. So again, I'm not presenting this information to diminish the threats of violence faced by people of color in the face of white supremacy and nationalism, and I'm also not claiming that every alt-right and AntiFa activist is a cop or a government agent. What I'm attempting to raise awareness about is the possibility that various forces within the ruling class, government, media, unions, academia, etc., may be stoking the flames of racial division, or in some cases, directly going to the streets to commit acts of violence. Because you have to remember this, make no mistake, the violence will be answered with a heavily militarized police force. We've already seen this in other places. We've seen them clamp down and install martial law briefly after the Boston bombing. We've seen it in Standing Rock and other places. And we've also seen it after Charlottesville. Once these fights happen in the street, they come in and they swoop in like, we're here to save the day. And the people are forced to deal with whatever they say. So remember these things. For one, if you're wearing masks, if you're working with other people who choose to wear masks at protests and at rallies, try to see if you know them. Talk to them. Don't just let people come in and take over your movements, because that's what's been taking place. So whether you're Antifa or of the alt-right white nationalists, right-wing, and whatever you call yourself, if you're out there on the streets and you're surrounded by people in masks, I would be very wary, very careful of this. Another thing is, they might not be cops necessarily, but groups like By Any Means Necessary, who are more left-wing, who work under the Antifa banner, they have a history. I've been doing research on them. I'll probably do another video just on them. They have a history going back to at least the early 90s of being kicked out of protests and kicked out of rallies for being too violent. And not by people on the right wing, but by people on the left who are just like, these are crazy people. So their tactics, they're known for using violence. So it could just be that's their bad strategy. I disagree with it. But it's also very easy for then a cop to come in and infiltrate and to use that. So remember that. Be very wary of people who are around you and who are masked up and things of that sort. Also, remember that this is a historical, a repetition of a historical battle in the sense of National Socialism or fascism versus communism. The commies and the fascists have always fought each other, and in the middle of that, the anarchists either temporarily aligned with the communists to fight the fascists, and then the communists turned on the anarchists, or the anarchists tried to stay independent and were swallowed up. So this is another classic battle. This is anti-status versus all the statists and authoritarians. We're just seeing the stripes and the shades of authoritarianism from left to right come out into the open now. So remember that. This has historical precedence. The final thing is, let's take away a renewed sense of skepticism and self-awareness. Remember to question everything, including your own presumptions and motives. Remember that most people in the world are experiencing and enjoying intermingling with a diverse set of cultures, customs, foods, traditions, languages. The majority of people are not judging others based on their color or nation of birth. Most of us are free, beautiful, powerful beings. We are surrounded by free, beautiful, powerful individuals. The sooner we recognize this, the sooner we can move past this division and centralization that is being forced on our lives. That's what it's about. It's time for us to wake up to that, to see ourselves and our brothers and sisters, and to recognize that this manufactured division it's a psyop on our lives, and it's an attempt to divide us and take us apart. It's not organic in any form or fashion. Remember that. And if you guys enjoyed this, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Conscious Resistance, or follow us on Facebook at The Conscious Resistance Network. You can follow me on Twitter at DBrozeLiveFree. And of course, if you want to support what we do here, because we are completely user self-funded, you can sign up at my Patreon account, and that goes into funding The Conscious Resistance and allowing me to do more reports like this. So you can find that at patreon.com/Derrick Broze. Thank you guys for listening. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.